Let's now cross two pea plants together. I'm actually on the wrong slide here. That's the slide where I have to start. So it's a monohybrid cross of a pea plant. Monohybrid, as I explained, refers to a single factor cross. So we only look at one characteristic. And in this case, we look at flower color. And we're defining our alleles, and we say, okay, we use the letter R, and capital R is the allele for red flowers. It is dominant. The word red, the red phenotype is dominant, and therefore I use the capital R. And the recessive allele, which shows up as white when in homozygous, I have to give a little r in this case. And over here, the P stands for the parental generation. These are the parents. And I'm now crossing two pea plants, one with a red flower color, and it is red because it contains at least one capital R, one dominant allele. So this is a red flower, and it is crossed with the recessive phenotype, little r, little r. I do not see a capital R over here, so it is white. So I'm crossing a red flower with a white flower. Both of them are pure. This means that both of them are homozygous. Capital R here, dominant here. It's the same, it's homozygous. Lowercase r here, recessive in both cases, so it's homozygous as well. And what these plants do is when they want to reproduce, they produce gametes. They produce sperm and egg cells. And these gametes, gametes are the reproductive cells. These gametes only contain half of the DNA. So this plant here contains 2 times a capital R, but in the gametes, there is only one of the alleles in there. And in this case, we only have one possibility anyway. It can only be capital R, and also over here, capital R. There are no other possibilities. And same over here, lowercase r, lowercase r. So these over here, as well as those here, these are the gametes. And now imagine that you take a little brush and manually, by your hand, you transfer pollen from one plant to another plant. Then, of course, thousands of different pollen grains are transferred, and there are many possibilities how the sperm cells and the egg cells can fertilize each other. So we have to try out all combinations, and by drawing a so-called Punnett grid or Punnett square. I suppose it's named by according to Mr. or Mrs. Punnett. You can now try all combinations, and if this gamete over here is fertilized by this gamete over here, we have a capital R, lowercase r, it's a heterozygous plant. Over here, the same thing, over here as well, and over here as well. So all of the offspring, and these offspring are referred to as the F1 generation. The F stands for filial. P stands for parental, the parents, and F1 stands for filial. And you can see that all of them have capital R, lowercase r, all of them are heterozygous. And the F1 genotype would be 100% capital R, lowercase r. And 100% heterozygous in relation to flower color. Now, what color do they now have? What is their phenotype? Because all of them have at least a dominant red flower allele, 100% of them look just like one of the parents over here. 100% of them are red. And so you can see there are 2 different possibilities to have a red flower. Either you're homozygous over here, or you're heterozygous. But by simply looking at the plant, you do not see a difference. You have to do, nowadays in the modern world, you would do a DNA test. In the 19th century, they did a so-called a test cross. You still can do that if you want to. But simply by looking at the plant, you will not know if a plant which displays a dominant characteristic is homozygous or heterozygous. So we have now F1 plants, and what we do now is the following. Let's cross two of them together. And this is now the case. We take two of these plants together, and again, now the situation becomes a little bit more interesting. Again, we're forming gametes. I'm writing them up here. This is the dominant gamete. So now we have two different types of gametes. 50% of the sperm cells, let's say, are dominant for red, and 50% of the sperm cells are recessive. So if they tell you somewhere that 50% of the gametes have one allele and the other 50% have the other allele, then you know that the parent must be heterozygous or hybrid. Now, if we do that, again, we do our cross. We have this sperm cells over here is fertilizes this egg cell over here, capital R, homozygous dominant, it's a red flower, capital R, lowercase r, this is again a red flower, but it's heterozygous. Same over here, and over here we have homozygous recessive. So what are the genotypes over here? We have one homozygous dominant, two heterozygous plants, one homozygous recessive plant. And the phenotypes, how many red and how many white flowers do we have? We have 1, 2, 3 red flowers, and the lowercase r, the homozygous recessive one is of course white. And this is the classical 3-to-1 ratio when crossing two heterozygous plants in a monohybrid cross. And these plants over here, they are of course the F2, the second filial generation. Okay, so this was the basically a summary of some of the experiments that Gregor Mendel did in the 19th century when he was crossing pea plants. And what is the significance over here? One of the things that I would like to point out is that you have over here two red parents, and if you cross them, you get 25% of offspring have a characteristic which the parents do not have. So 25% here are white. So a characteristic reappears which was there in the grandparents, so to say. So these are the parents, but the grandparents, remembered in the pea generation there was a white plant, it reappears here. So the white skips or jumps a generation and reappears only over here in the F2. And that is a little bit was a paradox which he was able to uncover. Gregor Mendel he was able to show that apparently these red plants still carry hidden somewhere the allele for a white flower color, but you cannot see it. And that is the interesting discovery, because many people thought, well, if you see a certain characteristic, then it's going to be inherited. And I said, well, no, not always. Sometimes you don't see it, and it's still passed on, and it can reappear after a few generations.